Kid, you can have some. No, you don't have to take a shoe off. He's kidding. So it was always interesting when you get in those situations and you deal with the public out in a place where they do not expect such a contact. You're eating Chick-fil-A. By the way, I have no stock in Chick-fil-A for whomever is watching this. It was just a nice thing that they did. We are on the fearless prisoner, Acts chapter 4 and 5 and 12. So we'll be doing this. Let's see, after this one, we have the reluctant reconciler next week, which will be Acts 10. Then we're going to be off a week because of the congregational meeting. And then on the 28th, we're doing the passionate writer, 1st and 2nd Peter. So I don't know exactly how to do that. We'll have to see that. So we're coming close to the end of this. So let's start with the prayer, and we pray at this time. Gracious Lord, we thank you for those who have gone before us, who have been fearless in their faith. Someone like Peter, who we see faith living and active and strong. Lord, help each of us also, we pray, that our faith might be living and active and strong no matter what we face in our lives. We ask this in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. So let's see. We're going to, as we see the incidents in Peter's, the first one is just going to be a detention for questioning, held over for questioning, I guess you could say. Authorities released him, and yet the last two are going to end kind of miraculously. We've already looked at the first one in connection with the healing from Acts 3, but we'll take a brief look at the text there from Acts chapter 4. So we're jumping right in. While they were speaking to the people, the chief priest, the captain of the temple police, and the Sadducees confronted them. So they stood in front of them, and it's interesting that the verb tenses probably would be that they suddenly burst out and were in front of them, and it implies a hostile attitude. It wasn't a friendly, hi, I see you're at Chick-fil-A giving out things today. It's, what are you doing? Because remember, they did not care for what they were doing. Because, it goes on in verse 2, they were annoyed that they were teaching the people and proclaiming in Jesus the resurrection of the dead. Now, it's interesting that during Jesus' lifetime, there had been a ban placed on him. This is from John 9:22. I don't know if you remember this. It's the fellow who was healed, and his parents said, well, you have to ask him because he's an adult, because they didn't want to get kicked out of the temple as well. In that, it was in John 9:22. His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, since the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed Jesus as the Messiah, he would be banned from the synagogue. So there was this ban there that was going on, and they did not want to be banned. Indignant, annoyed, they were very unhappy that they were talking about. And notice what they're talking about. It's the resurrection of the dead. There's a change, I guess, we need to think about here. In the Gospels, Jesus mainly contends against the Pharisees. Is that fair to say? You hear more about the Pharisees, right? But as we move into Acts, it seems like it's more the Sadducees, and the Sadducees are the ones who are involved. And they hold the priesthoods, and I think if I remember right, they actually bought the high priesthood from the Romans, a little money passed hands under the table, or maybe not under the table even, but so money passed hands, and so we have a different group of people. And the important thing to remember is, why are the Sadducees sad? They are sad, you see, because they do not believe in the resurrection, period. So not even about Jesus' resurrection, right? But they do not believe in the resurrection. For them, it's the first 5 books of what we would call the Old Testament, the Torah, was their scripture. They did not buy into the Psalms and prophets, any of that. It was just those first 5 books. And so that's where they get their part. So you have to remember them, that there is a different group in charge, and perhaps that's why they are so annoyed that they confront them, because they're proclaiming Jesus' resurrection. Verse 3, so they seized them. They laid their hands upon them, literally would be what it would be, and took them into custody. Notice this does not say arrest. It's, although some people would quote it that way, they are being confined for a short period of time because it is evening as they're coming apparently, or no, I'm sorry, by the time they get them, it's evening. That's what it says in verse 3, and so they need to do it during the daytime for the council, the synagogue, to officially, the Sanhedrin, not the synagogue, to officially meet needs to be during the daytime hours. Remember when Jesus was tried, they did something at night, and they met in the morning to make it, quote, official, because the evening one was technically against their rules and regulations. It's interesting that they went ahead and did it anyway at that point. So into custody, not really arrested in the same sense that we'll see in a few moments, but it says in verse 4, but many of those who heard the message believed, and the number of men came to about 5,000. One commentator says that means that they are close to outnumbering the Pharisees at this time, which is an interesting thought. I don't know where they get their numbers for that. That's just what one commentator says, so perhaps that is true. Remember, they're going to be told not to say anything, right? And so they're going to be let go and all. And then we're going to continue to follow them as we jump to chapter 5. So it's an introduction, right? An introduction to being taken because of your faith. And so this is, one other thing I wanted to say about that. I'm sorry, let me double check. It is Peter and John. And next then we are going to chapter 5 and we're going to come up with a slightly different grouping. Okay. Chapter 5. It says 18 to 20, but I threw in 17 since that's when it starts up. The high priest rose up. He and all those who were with him who belonged to the party of the Sadducees were filled with jealousy. Now remember, Sadducees now instead of Pharisees. Jealousy is interesting because it's the same thing that the religious leaders had against Jesus. From Mark 15, and I think it's significant, at least in my mind, that it's Mark 15, verse 10. Peter remembered this and told Mark to write, I believe, for he knew, this is Pontius Pilate, that it was out of envy or jealousy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over. And so the same thing, they're jealous, they're envious of the crowd and the change that is happening. People are coming and listening to them. People are converting to this new faith, and they are very unhappy, they being the religious leaders. I mean, when you have 5,000, that's a pretty good sized crowd, and that has now come to believe over this period of time. And if it's true that it's more, as many as the Pharisees, it is quite a number. Verse 18, so they arrested. That is a completely different word. It is more technically arrested than the word that was used in our previous one. Notice who did they arrest? So we have a larger group, right? It's not just Peter and John, it's the apostles. So the apostles are the ones who are out there doing their thing here, and put them, that's the apostles, in the public jail. So they're all thrown in. It's a different location. It's a different word used for jail than was used before. The older translations say in public ward, one of the common prisons, perhaps not the common prison, but the public prison, they said. I don't know what the difference is, but it's a different location than they were held before. And I think it's important to note that this is all in the temple grounds that we're talking about. At this point, we still have the religious leaders are the ones who, using their troops, are gathering them all together. It is not the Romans yet. We will run into that at the next one. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, so disciples, apostles, followers, what's the designation between all of those?
An apostle, how many apostles were there?
Oh, well, yeah,
Well, technically we're 13.
right,
Oh, okay.
Actually, 14. Because there were the 12, right?
right,
And so what happened? One of them hung himself,
Right.
which replaced with Matthias. So we're up to how many?
13.
Okay, and so who also calls himself an apostle?
Oh, Saul.
Paul is called an apostle. So that takes us up to,
Okay,
there were a total of 14.
okay.
So 14 disciples is sometimes used referring to apostles. And in my opinion, that's where it gets confusing, because disciples is also used in reference to all believers.
Yeah,
So sometimes that's where it gets mushy, if I can use that highly technical word, mushy. That sounds like a good one, actually, though. But here it's specific. It says the apostles. Now, I'm not sure if that's all 12 apostles right there. Remember that group of 12, which would include Matthias, but not Paul, Saul Paul guy yet, because he hasn't been converted yet at this point, right? That's coming a little bit. So, yeah. So that's why it gets messy, because sometimes the terms are used to say different things. But when it says apostles, it's talking about the subgroup of disciples or believers that Jesus had chosen, the 12, and then they chose one to replace who had been with them from the beginning, Matthias, right? So you got all that fun stuff going on. Okay, so let's see, that's verse 18. Verse 19, but an angel of the Lord opened the doors of the jail during the night. This is where it gets fun. And said, go and stand in the temple and tell the people all about this life. Notice the instruction. What are they supposed to do? After being released, where are they to go?
In the temple.
Go back to the temple. That's where they had been arrested, right?
Right.
Go back to where you had been arrested. And what are you supposed to do? Part 2?
Talk about the life.
But notice what it says. All about this life. Another translation, the full message of this new life.
Oh,
So it's important that you have been arrested and told not to say anything, but don't hold anything back. Now that's my interpretation. Say everything. This life, this resurrected life is what we're talking about. And the resurrection of Jesus is the part that was specified before that really put them in prison, right? Because that's what they were talking about. So make sure you keep telling all about this to people. That's what is changing the hearts and lives of people, the hope of the resurrection. That's why you can preach a sermon on somebody like Betty, who had the hope of the resurrection and was able to then, even as she's lying in her deathbed, a couple of weeks later when she dies, that she could tell her family and loved ones, I know where I'm going. I'm at peace with that. I want you to know that as well. And it's all about the life after death. When you ask people, what happens when you die? Well, we don't know. If you just, that's it. Then you kind of go, okay, what does that mean,
yeah.
You just cease to exist. Well, that's where you, okay. Going off topic. Verse 21. Hearing this, what did they do? They entered the temple at daybreak and began to preach. They went back to where they had been. And they began to tell people. According to the notes I had read, that the temple would open at daybreak for early worshipers and early prayers. So very early in the morning they began teaching. It didn't teach, but they began with the implication of continuing to do that. And the Sanhedrin, well, they're not going to be happy. And this is where we spent most of our time is looking at this text. We had looked at more of this. Verse 21b, I guess. When then the high priest and those who were with him arrived, they convened the Sanhedrin, the full council of the Israelites, and sent orders to the jail to have them brought. But when the servants got there, they did not find them in the jail, so they returned and reported, we found the jail securely locked with the guards standing in front of the doors, but when we opened them, we found no one inside. As the captain of the temple police and the chief priests heard these things, they were baffled by them, wondering what would come of this. Someone came and reported to them, look, the men you put in jail are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then the commander went with the servants and brought them in without force because they were afraid the people might stone them, the them being the guards, because, these people don't take them away. So they went freely. They brought them in, and they had them stand before the Sanhedrin. And the high priest said, "Didn't we strictly order you not to teach in this name?" Notice it's this name. "Look, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood." That's ironic because remember at the trial of Jesus, that's Matthew 27, when Pilate said, "I'm not guilty," the people said, "His blood be on us and our children," but again, that's a different group of people. The Sanhedrin apparently were not involved. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what we say. Anyway, so then we have Gamaliel, who will give his advice, basically let them go. We looked at that before, didn't we? Gamaliel says, let them go. If it's of God, you can't stop it. And guess what? It's going to be of God, and they're not going to be able to stop it at all. So it's quite interesting. So a little more, again, they are threatened with this. And I skipped something there, didn't I? I meant to say, verse 40, after they called in the apostles and had them flogged. Anyone here ever been flogged?
No, thank you.
It would be very difficult, right? Very painful. They ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus and released them. Then they went out, that's the apostles, went out from the presence of the Sanhedrin, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to be treated shamefully on behalf of the name. That to me is an amazing sentence. Would you be so joyful to be treated so? Thank you for treating me so in front. Every day in the temple, in various homes, they continued teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. They did not stop. We'll go 1 and 2. Yes, sir?
The phrase angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, I think means God is the person.
In the Old Testament?
Yeah,
The angel of the Lord?
yeah. Does that mean the same here?
This is an angel, not the angel of the Lord. I think it's completely different at this point. I know the English words are the same, but obviously this is Greek and the other is Hebrew. And there's a great question about who the angel of the Lord is. Is it, you can read, that's another thing you could read. If you want to read a lot of theology, you can read on that. Because some will say it is the pre-incarnate Son of God who comes in that way. Others will say others. So it's not the same. This is an angel like we had. Very similar. Well, actually in Acts 12, some of the words are almost identical to those that were told to the shepherds when they came to announce, when angels came. These are messengers from God. And I think it's more like that. Angels like that. Angels who were present at the empty tomb, or an angel, one says, and then there were 2 angels. So it would be that type of messenger. The angels that were used in announcing Jesus' conception and all of that. I mean, all of those things. So we're talking about different things here. Not the exact same. Mr. Tim.
Is there any recorded information about the jailer who probably was facing death for letting them get out?
Now, this is not Roman. Remember, at this point, these are not Romans. This is the Jewish. This is a little different. No, in chapter 12 is where we get to the quadrillion, I think it's called, the 16 soldiers and that Peter escaped. They were executed in keeping with the rule of Justinian, I think it is. So yeah, that would be kind of, well, we'll get to that.
I mean, do we know how this must have impacted his life? About the jailer or the person in charge of?
Okay, that will be, that's later on in Acts. The one you're talking about where, that's Paul, where there's an earth, isn't it the earthquake, the angel unlocks everything, all the,
Right.
that, yeah, so all of the prisoners are still there. He was going to fall on his sword. That's Roman. That would be, he knew that he would be executed because he had failed, except nobody had left, so he wouldn't be executed. That's the strange thing. And so instead, no, he is That's when Paul preaches to him and he and his whole family become believers. But that's later on as well. We're going to get into one of the problems there in chapter 12, which is where we will go next. Okay, so things have changed in the third and final one. I think that's important to note. It's not the Sanhedrin who's ordering the arrest, but now it is Herod Agrippa.
Yeah.
Who is Herod Agrippa? He's one of the Herods, right? He's the grandson of Herod the Great. This is going to be one of these guys, and he apparently is very, where some of the Herods were not very faithful in following Jewish regulations, he was, apparently, very much so. And already at this time, James, the brother of John, you could read that in Acts 12, verse 2. I guess we're going to read that briefly here. He was the first apostle to die that we know of, at least listed. And remember that James and John were told that they would suffer, indeed, drink from the same cup of Jesus that Jesus did. It's interesting that James was the first, and we believe, again, we can't prove, that John was the last of the apostles to die. Again, that's belief type thing. And so we are sometime later now, and so we are in chapter 12, verse 1. About that time, it's a very interesting phrase. About that time, it doesn't say it exactly when. Most of the commentators I looked at say we are now in about AD 44, because they're figuring out based on the death of Herod, and Barnabas and Saul had come down from Antioch to Jerusalem after the persecution by Herod at the end of 44, beginning of 45. And so this is sometime in that time frame, it is believed. And so about that time, King Herod violently attacked some who belonged to the church. So there's been a period of time when there was more relative peace, apparently, for the church. Some would suggest after the death of Stephen and the conversion of Saul to Paul, that's occurred by now, that there may have been 7 or 8 years where there was not this persecution going on. So there was a period of time. Of course, anytime, in my opinion, you figure out a number of years, you're guessing at that point. They're all pretty much estimate type thing. And so in verse 2 it says, and he, that's good old Herod, executed James, John's brother, with the sword. Does not sound like a good way to die. I don't know. Maybe better than crucifixion, perhaps, or something. When he saw that it pleased, that's a fun word, isn't it? Pleased, made them happy. The Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter too during the festival of unleavened bread. What is the festival of unleavened bread? We would refer to it as Passover, right? Okay, so doesn't this sound a lot like Jesus being arrested during Passover? Except this is Herod. So this is Roman involvement. This is not the Sanhedrin in charge at this time. The one place I read said this. By this parenthesis, Luke locates the time of the year when Peter was arrested, the Passover. It was a fine occasion for Agrippa to increase his favor among the crowds of Jews there by extra zeal against the Christians. So let's get those Christians, right? Anytime at any Passover, there are going to be more Jewish people having come in, and so this would kind of make him more popular with that group of people. Verse 4, after the arrest, he put him in prison. This is a Roman prison we are in now, and assigned 4 squads of 4 soldiers each to guard him, intending to bring him out to the people after the Passover. Which is interesting because that's different than what happened to Jesus, right? That was during Passover, right before the Passover, the day of Passover. Instead, he's going to wait till after. He's following Jewish rules and regulations better there, interesting, than even the Sanhedrin did before. And so I read a little bit about the 4 squads of 4 soldiers. Seems like a lot of people. That doesn't mean 16 people are watching them all the time. Apparently, the standard Roman practice was 2 would be chained to him, 2 would be outside the cell. So we would have 4 on, and they would work in shifts. So as I understand it, it would be groups of 4 at a time. So you are Roman soldiers, you have Tim chained to you, so he's taking extra precaution, apparently, because he heard Peter got out, right?
Yeah.
And so if you got 2 people chained to him, you would think that they would notice when he was gone. And you would think if they wouldn't notice and he went out the door and had people guarding that they would notice. So he's taking extra precautions because he knows something happened for this guy before. So we're going to make sure he doesn't get out. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was praying. How were they praying?
Fervently.
So what do you think fervently means?
They're down on their knees.
Yeah, probably night and day, non-stop.
Right.
Now it's interesting
No.
that, so if we have 5,000 people, right, 5,000 men it said, so they're not all going to be in a church building someplace.
Right.
They're going to be different places, right? We don't know where, we don't know all of that, don't know the organizational system that they had there, but Peter's going to go to somebody's house, and there are going to be people who are gathered there, and we believe that they're praying. I think one of the biggest ironies is the prayer's answered standing outside the door, and they don't figure out that the prayer's answered, right? I mean, it's kind of fun if you think about it, but it's very dangerous also. So they're praying fervently. They continued to pray. I would think with that many people, they probably had prayer vigils or something like that to make sure that prayers are going up all the time for him. Verse 6, when Herod was about to bring him out for trial, that very night, Peter, bound with 2 chains, was sleeping between 2 soldiers while the sentries in front of the door guarded the prison. So it's secure, right? Now, bringing him out for trial, we believe that his idea was to kill Peter.
Yeah.
Right? There's no doubt about it. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to kill Peter. That's his plan. But he's going to wait till after Passover is out. So think about this. If Peter was an aware person, which I think he was, he would have known that he was going to, probably the next day is when there's going to be the trial, and he would be condemned to death, is what we believe. And so what's he doing? What's it say he's doing here? He's sleeping.
Oh, sleeping. Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
if you knew that the next day you were more than likely going to be killed, what would you be doing? Would you be sleeping peacefully?
No.
Isn't it interesting that he's peacefully sleeping? Sleeping so hard, interestingly, I find verse 7 amazing. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, not the angel of the Lord, an angel, one of these messengers, let's go down. This is the wake-up angel. How about we call him that?
Yeah.
And a light shone in the cell. Now that would be surprising because they didn't have lights like that. Striking Peter on the side, whack! Basically, this is his wake-up whack
Yeah.
because he's sleeping. He woke him and said, "Quick, get up!" And the chains fell off his wrists. Now it had to. We've got our 2 guards there who were chained to Peter, also apparently, I'm assuming asleep, because else we would think they would do something. And the whack was not loud enough. The light was not, I don't know. It had to be something, some God thing to let them continue to be asleep. And also for the 2 fellows on the outside as well. That same form, interesting, the same form of the verb about the one that, it's the same form in Luke 2, verse 9, about the sudden angel appearance to the shepherds. It's just exactly the same.
I got a question.
Strongly enough, this is what I wrote, I found this fun. Strongly enough to wake Peter up, who was sound asleep, and yet not to rouse the guards. It was probably between 3 and 6 hours when the changes of the guard were made. So sometime between the change of the guard.
Yeah, I've always wondered about this because anytime you see a film about something like this, these guys are wearing grungy clothes, they've been thrown into jail, et cetera, but it tells them to get dressed. I didn't ever read anything about them, letting them get
There are
undressed.
the external clothing, he still had clothes on, but it was kind of like his coat
Oh,
and all of that. That's what I believe. Is
Okay,
they have
that
those
makes sense.
He had his sandals off, he's gonna sleep,
Right.
put on your sandals, put on your shoes, I guess we would say, right?
Yeah.
Shoes and socks, get your coat, because you're leaving, and do it quickly, right?
Yeah.
Verse 8, get dressed, the angel told him, and put on your sandals, and he did. Wrap your cloak, that would be the external garment around you, he told him, and follow me. Now, if you were sound asleep, do you wake up quickly when you're sound asleep?
No.
Some people, it takes time. I don't know what Peter's standard thing would be. But the follow me, I guess the other thing, my note told me to remind you that it's keep on following me. It's not just follow me, but keep on following me. Verse 9, so he went out and followed, and he did not know that what the angel did was really happening, but he thought he was seeing a vision. What was really happening, ginomai, to be, become, to take place, he did not know what he was experiencing was taking place, or was this some sort of vision thing? Remember later on Peter would have this vision thing with the sheet coming down and all the animals a couple times, remember that? This is what apparently he wondered if that's what was happening instead, if it was a very, almost like a live dream type thing and something like that. So that's fascinating to think that. Keep on following the angel. Puzzled, he's puzzled. Well, that was in Joppa in chapter 10, verse 10 that I just noted. Verse 10, after they passed the first and second guards, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened to them by itself. You know, the electric eye caught it and opened it up, type thing.
Yeah.
Do they have those type of things in the doors
Well, I
open
can
by,
see it.
do they open automatically by themselves? They went outside and passed one street. So we're out of the jail. We're out of being from the immediate location of the Roman guards. He's gone through them safely, and suddenly the angel left him. Angel's gone. Just like the angel showed up, the angel's gone. Verse 11, when Peter came to himself, what do you think that means?
Realize what was going on.
This
Woke
isn't
up
a
little
dream,
bit
huh?
more. Yeah.
Right.
Am I really out here?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
It's not a dream. Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me, or delivered me, from Herod's grasp and from all that the Jewish people expected. He expected to be dead. Is what he expected. That's what Herod wanted, to have him dead. And instead, he walks out alive. It is not an ecstasy. I guess that's the word some people use for what he had done. Ecstasy has different meanings today, though. So interesting how words change so dramatically. Verse 12, as soon as he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who's called Mark, where many had assembled and were praying. We keep running into her and to John Mark, don't we? And so her home appears to be important. It is one of the places where at least part of the church was meeting, correct? At least that's what we see here. Remember, Michael Card had strongly suggested, I don't know if it's correct or not, that her home is near the edge of the city and that this is where the Last Supper was held. That's what, of course, he has no evidence whatsoever. I think he wants it to be true. Sometimes you want something to be true, you'll say, make it true. We don't know. But it's interesting that there are lots of Marys. It seemed to be a very popular name, right? This is one thing I read about her. This is what someone has come up with. Again, take it for what it's worth. She may have been, don't you like these may have been a widow and was possessed of some means since her house was large enough to hold a large group of disciples here. Disciples being believers, not necessarily apostles. Because, well, Barnabas, cousin of John Mark, her son, was also a man of property, or had been, at least at one point. It is probable that the disciples had been in the habit of meeting in her house a fact known to Peter, and he was evidently fond of John Mark, whom he afterwards calls my son, that's in 1 Peter 5, and whom he had met here. The upper room in Acts 1:13 may have been at Mary's house, and Mark may have been, well, here we're going, may have been the man bearing the pitcher of water and the young man who fled in the garden of Gethsemane. Okay, so it's putting lots of stuff there to the house of Mary. Apparently it was well known, lots of people there of praying, continually praying. We were talking about that, and so they're praying. And he knocks at the door to the outer gate. An outer gate, there would be an inner gate, so it's a larger home, and that's when the servant, actually the word we should probably translate as slave, she's a slave girl, named Rhoda, came to answer. Do you remember her in this story? Oh, she's interesting. She's very interesting. And so she comes there, she comes to answer it, and she's listening before opening it. And she recognized Peter's voice. That's verse 14, right? So she recognizes his voice. So he had been there before. She'd been where she was before. And this is the fun sentence. I love this sentence. And because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing at the outer gate. So Peter, who has escaped from Roman prison through the agency of an angel, is standing out there knocking at the door. He doesn't know whether the Roman soldiers have been aroused by now and go, where's Peter? We better find him or else we're dead. He doesn't know those things. And so if I were Peter, I would be knocking a little louder perhaps, because she runs. Isn't it interesting? Because of her joy, from her joy. And how has she received her comments? Verse 15.
They don't believe it. She's only a servant.
Isn't that
You're
fun?
out of your mind.
You're out of your mind. She's raving, insane almost. Interesting, the thing they prayed for, the person they prayed for, the thing being his freedom, being freed from prison, has occurred. The proof is standing at the gate, and they don't believe it.
That's right.
And the woman who comes to tell them this, they don't, oh, where have we heard that before? Could that be at Jesus' resurrection, where the women who came and said they did not believe them either? But she kept insisting. This is continual action, not a one-time thing, insisting that this is true. And they said, well, obviously it's not Peter, it's this angel. Apparently there's this idea common in Jewish thought at the time I have read of, that you have a guardian angel. I mean, people do that today too. You have guardian angel stuff. Luke doesn't say that's true. The Bible itself does not say that true, I don't think. If you can find a good passage that says that, let me know. But that was a common thought, so maybe that's what it is. Because we don't want, isn't it interesting, the exact thing they prayed for was happening, and they were having trouble believing it. Yes, ma'am?
Well, there's some discussion about that when we pray fervently, or you pray, but you don't really believe that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen. So it's like, the basket, taking your eggs and leaving all the eggs with the Lord, or all the prayers with the Lord, because you keep possession of them. So even though they're praying fervently, they, to their astonishment that this happened, they made, in their own mind, it was like, well, this is ridiculous. That knowing the Romans, knowing what's happening, this isn't going to happen. And so there's been some discussion about that we don't trust. We don't give it up, actually. And
But think just for a moment that this is not the first time Peter has been released from prison in a rather, from guard. Now this is stronger prison, I guess. This is prison, where the other was just, he was detained, and he wasn't guarded, he was in prison, but it wasn't as much. This is Roman prison. These are soldiers watching him under threat of death if he were to escape, so they're going to do their best to make sure. So it's interesting that they had some previous things that happened, and You know, if it were me, I would like to say, well, at least I'll go look at the gate. You know, I'll trust you enough, Rhoda, I'll go take a look. And maybe it's true, I don't know. But, you know, to placate her, if nothing else, I don't know.
But it could also be that the first group of people that were guarding him were just church people. And maybe they thought of those as buffoons, but they were really afraid of the Romans.
Well, oh, yeah, but the first people who were guarding him were actually the guard of the temple guard.
Right.
So they would be like your local police, I guess. So, I mean, so there's somebody. It's not just
Right, but a lot of
it's
people,
not just you or me guarding them and saying, don't leave.
but a lot of
Please.
people don't really respect the local police, and yet
That's
they
true.
do the state police. That's what
Okay.
I'm thinking.
Verse 16. Peter, however, kept on knocking. And when they finally opened the door and saw him, they were amazed. It does not say what Rhoda said. I want to know what she said.
I want to know what
I
she
have all
said.
these strange thoughts, right?
Yes.
Really? Peter's there? Isn't that amazing? Oh, no. She would have said something like that. They were astonished, astounded. I like the sense. To be utterly amazed, to be or become astounded to such a degree as to nearly lose one's mental composure. A continued knocking kept on doing it. And he asked to silence them, verse 17. He described to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. Tell these things to James and the brothers, he said. Now, what's interesting about that is apparently none of the apostles were there at this location.
Oh, yeah.
None of those are mentioned to be there. This James is not James who had died, but this is James, the brother of the Lord, who became kind of the acting head of the church, is who that was. Is that what you're going to ask? Oh, it's not the same guy. No, it's not the same guy. This is James, the brother of the Lord. Don't know how he became, but he becomes acting head of the church, interestingly, in Jerusalem. And so what happens to Peter? It's an interesting phrase.
Yeah.
And he left and went to another place. Here in chapter 12.
Well, he had to get out of Dodge.
Right.
Now, some suggest he was hiding in Jerusalem. I'm doubting that myself. I would agree with you that he left town somehow before it got too hot. He does not come, he is not mentioned at being back in Jerusalem until chapter 15 with that great church council. That's the only time after this that Peter is mentioned in being in Jerusalem. Now he goes out and does things, right? It's not like we don't hear anything about him, but by around chapter 15, that's the last time we're going to hear from him, and he's gone. And remember, at that point, attention goes from Peter to Paul. And so he will be the primary one. Verse 18, at daylight there was a great commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. Well, if I'm one of the people guarding him, how about if I'm one of the quadrillion who was not on duty, but I'm in charge, I'm supposed to, it wasn't my turn, and I'm scared to death because I could be put to death. Now, I don't know. I've not read that part to see whether the guys who aren't on duty would also be put to death, but I think Herod might put everybody to death because he's going to be ticked off. And you remember the Herods were not known to be kind and happy people. After Herod had searched and did not find him, of course, it's not Herod who's searching. He has people searching for him. He interrogated the guards. I don't think that was just words. I think that would be difficult, and ordered their execution. And that's what they did. The guards were put to death for having failed. That is the Roman rule of Justinian. But the interesting thing to see is that Peter is rescued here. If he had died here, we would not have 1st and 2nd Peter. We have those books. Apparently, another estimate is 30 years of life for Peter after this. But again, he virtually disappears from the narrative here. Chapter 15, left Jerusalem, we believed, as others did, and he left for another place. It's like Luke doesn't know where, or he kept it silent. I don't know. I would think that he would have figured out where. But it's interesting. Peter is threatened. He's beaten. He's imprisoned. And it looks like he's really isn't too concerned about the danger to himself. And the night before, when he thought he was going to be executed the next day, he's able to sleep soundly. It's been some 10 years the day he was released after Jesus rose from the tomb. He left Jerusalem, and like we said, as far as we know, he went off and he did other work in other places, ending up all the way into Rome. We don't know if he went there immediately. I mean, there were other places, obviously, we'll find him and such. But yeah, isn't it interesting that he did not? God freed him and used him for maybe another 30 years to do his work. Tim?
I just wanted to confirm, you were saying that he's been having a ministry of 30 more years.
Apparently another 30 years or so that he will continue to work. So there's a good period of time. We will run into him. Well, you will run into him again in Acts, but not in Jerusalem. I mean, except for the chapter 15. Excuse me, except for chapter 15. Then there's that whole thing about the vision. That's Peter with the vision, right? The ecstasy vision of the sheet coming down from heaven and all of the, quote, unclean animals. Peter rise and eat. No, I can't. He did it twice. And he's going, huh? And that's when he's called. Well, that's actually what we're doing next week, I think. Actually, it's not that. I'm sorry, I have to go with Jim.
Wasn't Peter the founder of the church in Antioch?
I'm not sure actually founded, but he was there. I think there were believers that already gone.
So could this be the place that he went?
That could be. But again, that's a guess. Could be a good guess, but we don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's kept quiet because they didn't want people to know. In case the Romans get a hold of the document and say, well, we should take care of that. I mean, they could do something that nasty, I suppose.
That is the last sentence that really spikes my imagination. And so Herod, why does it mention that he went down from Judea to Caesarea? The only thing I can think of is Caesarea was probably a place where he felt safe for himself. And I wonder whether he was troubled by this whole incident.
I don't know.
I didn't say that, but I'm sorry to think that anyway.
I think get out of town. I mean, it's always good to get out of town, to go to another location, which is what he did. He was I imagine that he's in Jerusalem because of Passover and gets out because there's a wonderful place for him where he could go to Caesarea and stay there. And there's probably a lovely palace and all for him there.
But
and I'm sure he thought about that.
Yeah, okay. It's just odd.
And I'm sure it bothered him, but he's not going to tell people that it bothered him.
Right.
Because that would make him weak as a ruler or something like that. It's an amazing story. It's simply amazing that these folks, the lack of fear to continue on in the threat before them, that's pretty impressive. Tim, it's like it's going to be about our last one because we're about out of time.
Yeah. Then Peter would have predeceased John, who was the last disciple.
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch it.
That Peter would have predeceased John, who was the last disciple.
Yes, yeah. If I remember correctly, according to the tradition, that Peter and Paul died about the same time. That Peter was crucified, he's supposed to be crucified upside down because he wasn't within an X-shaped cross or something. And Paul was beheaded because Paul was a Roman citizen, and that was actually a quicker death than crucifixion. Sounds worse, but it's quicker. I mean, yeah. Interesting. So we're out of time. Next week we meet. We won't meet the week after that. Instead, there's a lovely meeting for us all to attend. So let's have a short prayer. Gracious Lord, help us to have faith that enables us, that encourages us, that no matter what comes our way, we can stand firm in faith, knowing you will walk with us through whatever comes our way. So be with us as we leave this place today. Continue to help us live for you every day in all that we do, no matter what we face. We ask this in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
There we go.